Hello, everyone. Let's start, as we always do, by going around and seeing how people are doing. We're having a nice storm here in Virginia, and hopefully we'll still have power for the next 60 minutes so we can complete this call. Rebecca, how about you go next? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, the weather's actually starting to warm up over here, so no complaints from Billings, Montana. I wanted to let you guys know I will have to leave at about 10 because I have a lab at 10:20. That was the best I could do with my schedule this
year. No worries. Thanks for coming, though. Michael, how about you?
Yeah, it's finally up to like 10 degrees today. So after having below zero for the past several days, I feel like I should put on shorts and go outside and run around in the snow.
Where are you joining us from?
A coffee shop.
That was my guess. Cool. Kelsey, how are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm in week 5 of the semester, so I'm starting to hit that little bit of a like, oh man, how long is this going to go? But similar to Michael, I'm in Minnesota, and so it's been below zero, well below for like more than a week straight. So it's a balmy 12 degrees. I just got back from a hike with that one, so we're pretty good at the moment.
You're getting outside, and it's at least habitable. Salaja, how about you?
Good morning. Hey everyone. I'm doing well, thank you. We had a round of snow in the Seattle area. I mean, Olympia area. We got 12 inches, which is news here, yeah. But otherwise the weather's been kind of mild. The snow is melting, so there's no snow on the ground now. And I just got done with my, they call it the J term, which is like 4 weeks. Very fast-paced 4-week term. I just got done with that. I'm now starting my spring semester.
Cool.
We started yesterday. So yeah, that's it. That's all. Thank you.
Yep. Holly, how about you?
Things are good here. Like Rebecca said, we're warming up a little bit. We had a record number of hours below zero the last few weeks. My sister's in Texas, and she feels like she's a superstar, having grown up in Montana and knows what to do in the snow. She has a scraper for her car and everything.
Well, that'd probably be rare there, yeah. Karen.
Hey, I'm calling in from Atlanta, and I'm on sabbatical, so I got nothing to bitch about. Done.
That's awesome. Let's do Zach.
Hi, folks. I'm Zach. I'm in Duluth, Minnesota. I teach at the College of St. Scholastica, and it's been pretty chilly here recently. We had to almost 40 below, which is cold for Duluth. I love it. I grew up in Alaska, and so I love the cold, and I was very excited to see that. But we're back to zero now, and it's all good.
It's all relative. So let me go ahead and pull the paper up. And this is, for me, my third drive through this. And it's actually very interesting to hear the differing perspectives that we've had over the last couple sessions. Oh, you know what? I didn't get Carlos, did I? Carlos, how are you doing?
I've got a helper, so it may be a good thing that you didn't get me. Yes, Amada. So they canceled school because they thought it would snow or ice in North Carolina. So I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. So we have an asynchronous online day, and we're in the middle of our 8-week term. So things are okay. I think, or as good as they can be.
Yeah, good. All things considered. So what we're talking about today, is the idea of the think, pair, share, and maybe questioning the share aspect a little bit of what the think, pair, share does. And they start with these scenarios to sort of get you into the thought process of what the issues might be with getting students to publicly share the results of their discussions. And I have to say, some of these struck me not as a teacher, but as a student from back in the day. Random call panic, for instance. The idea that I would be asked to get up there and answer questions in front of a group, just the anxieties that could come with that on a variety of different levels. So I actually related to that one a lot. The culture of seminars is an interesting one here as well, too, which is not exactly the same situation. It's not a classroom situation, but the idea of who can be free and comfortable engaging in those scientific conversations, and who is more afraid to potentially embarrass themselves, or who's afraid to put themselves out there with their questions. So these are ideas. Oh, and then of course, unnoticed inequities, which is something that I honestly hadn't thought much about. So these ideas in total are supposed to set us up for, I think, a more comprehensive discussion of how we look at think, pair, share, which here in table 1, just to remind you how we are defining this. For you guys individually, you may be using it in different ways or using different approaches. But what we're speaking about in general is the idea of giving students a chance to think about something, allowing them to get into a small group conversation, and then finishing it out with actually having the group share their ideas with the room. So how frequently do you guys find yourself using this particular technique? And do those assumptions that the paper starts with, or not even assumptions, the scenarios that the paper starts with, strike you with respect to maybe your own experiences with Think, Pair, Share?
I guess I would say for me, I've done a few iterations of the think, pair, share. I've done something which I just call think, pair, revise. So like they do something individually, they get together as a group after they've done that first part, and then talk with their partner about what they put for the answer, and do they still have the same answer after having discussed with one another? And if they do, they would write that, or if not, they would get the chance to write out a new answer and sort of win back some points if they maybe missed something in the first part. And that's more for quizzes sort of a thing. So it's still testing their knowledge, maybe helping them familiarize themselves with like taking exams in A&P. I've found that think, pair, shares, students really don't like being cold called at all. And I think I can relate to that pretty well. And I would agree with a lot of the things the paper said, like a lot of the reasons why they don't like it. And also it will tend to be like, even if you break students out into small groups, like it tends to be the same people answering, but you know, maybe they're trying to encompass in their answers everything that group talked about. I thought this paper was kind of cool because I liked seeing all of the challenges. Like I'd never seen like the challenges presented the way that they were in table 2. And I also thought it was kind of interesting because they also in table 3 gave alternatives. And so it was like a really sort of practical look at, well, if you aren't satisfied with how Think, Pair, Share is working, here's some other things you could try. And actually my favorite thing about the paper was the very last, sorry, I'm just getting it all at once, was the very last bit where they're like, maybe we should change the culture of scientific discussion. Because that was kind of what I was thinking when I was reading this is, are we setting them up for failure if we don't get them used to sort of being asked to give their opinion in a group setting, which was sort of my concern. And frankly, it's still a concern because I think it does take a while to change the, but I'm really glad that they addressed that. And I think slowly but surely, hopefully it would be something that would change over time as people realize, oh, maybe this is a problem. Look at the data. We're not hearing as much from women. Maybe we're not hearing as much from minorities, people who haven't historically had power in, not just in science, right? And so I thought that was really neat. I guess the one thing I had to add is I feel like it would benefit many people to start to internalize within themselves the confidence of just being able to like speak their mind, but maybe like the most, you know, thinking of us as a society, like the most efficient way moving forward is like, how do we instill that in the people, but also how do we make a culture that's more accepting? So I really liked this paper, is basically the sum of what I had to say.
Kelsey, do you want to explain the comment you made in chat about education research 2.0? Although maybe you're writing it here as where.
Yeah, I think that this is exciting, and I totally agree about the cultural shift. Like there's a whole bunch of research from various fields about, say, first generation students who have a hard time adjusting to the culture of higher education because it's just not culture that they're familiar with. And in so many ways, they have a hard time establishing their sense of belonging. And we know that this is especially true in STEM fields where there are all of these connotations, all of these habits of interaction, expectations that we have. But the 2.0 thing, you know, we know, for example, active learning works, right? We know that we should be using student-centered pedagogies and all of this stuff. And I think as we start off teaching and paying attention to what we're doing, we latch on to, okay, active learning, if I'm doing active learning, it's good. And so things like the Think, Pair, Share, we pat ourselves on the back and we're like, yay, right? But then if we dig in a little bit more, we really have to challenge ourselves to ask, for whom and why does whatever pedagogical choice we're making, why does that work? And so, I mean, I think my experience with soliciting student involvement, it always ends up getting, unless you're very, very careful, you always end up getting those dominant voices, yeah. Right? And even if you're trying to spread that out by a variety of mechanisms, classes very quickly establish this pattern of interaction where they know comfortable white male confident student is always going to answer for us, and so I can just hang back. And so that's what I mean by like for whom and why. And I think as education researchers and practitioners, that's where we are now. Not being satisfied with just the, okay, there's evidence that this thing works, but really look at where your class is, what the dynamics are, and not being afraid to change things. And I agree with Rebecca, this paper did a really great job of having some really practical strategies.
I wanted to just add, go ahead. I'll raise my hand.
Okay, Elijah, then Karen.
No, I guess Karen can go first. I have a few things to say.
Okay. Karen.
Oh, I was just going to say that as I was reading this, so I work at a pretty small college, and optimally I have classes that are no more than 24, and I realized that I have benefited. So usually for any of my classes, whether it's a new student for me or whether it's a student that I'm having in a second or maybe even a third class, I've gotten into the routine of meeting them at the beginning of the semester to talk about some of these things and where the student is with respect to, and I usually frame it around leadership, you know, just like, how are you engaging with the class? What are you comfortable? How are your learning mechanisms? And do you want to work on public speaking in this class as it pertains to representing ideas? Like, is this something that scares you, or is this something you want to work on? And I usually kind of have a little discussion. And if someone's like, no, you know, I'm not really into it, that's my version of turning that table tent around. And knowing that it's probably, you know, a black square that's kind of filled out for them. But sometimes they want to do it, and we talk about ways that they can use the active learning methodologies to help them with that. And I you know, reading this, I feel really blessed that I can take the time out to have those conversations, not just once, but maybe even twice or three times with the student along their trajectory.
Cool. So Elijah, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I have kind of used different ways of this think, pair, share. So I used to do cold calling first. I mean, first I just put it out to the class, and then I would have volunteers. And I found that it's the same 3 people who volunteer. Mm-hmm. And then I started. I think a year and a half back, I saw this Tanner paper through Palm, you know, the 21 ways to promote equity in class. And so the Tanner paper talked about using popsicle sticks. So I started doing that. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm probably putting students on the spot. So it's been an evolving thing. And so I didn't want to do that. And then I said, okay, I'm going to call 2 people, and then, you know, 2 people from 2 different groups. And I think that kind of reduced the student anxiety a little bit if you have 2 people sharing. And then, so that I think was okay. And then I didn't want to surprise the students. So I would walk around and see their work, and I would ask them, do you mind if I ask you to share this? Then I would have 2 people from 2 different groups to come up to the document camera and then share their work. I would say, okay, you discuss first part of the problem, you discuss second part of the problem. And then, so it's been an evolving thing for me, this think, pair, share. But I think in a way it's good that, you know, students pay more attention in class. They know that they have to participate in the activity because they might be asked to share their ideas. And instead of having them speak, having them read from a paper, I think helps a little bit. You know, that way they don't have to make eye contact with the class if they're not comfortable. They can just read from the paper, from their written part. And then I also spoke to my biology colleagues, and what one of them, she does in class is, you know, at the beginning of the class, she tells students that I'll be calling on everybody to share their answers. Mm-hmm. But if you're not comfortable, you know, please come and talk to me. If you don't want to be called on, you can, you know, just let me know ahead of time for the whole semester or at the time of the class. And then she said in Zoom, it's much easier. They said, you know, if it's not your day, you're not feeling up to it, just send me a private message in chat saying that don't call on me today. Mm. And I think that's, I don't know how you could do that in a face-to-face. Unless students can come walk up to you and say, I don't want to be called on today, then that might be okay. But it works pretty well in a Zoom because people can message you privately on chat for the day. And then what my colleague also suggested was to, you know, keep telling the students that, you know, this is really not about whether you did it right or wrong. Any answer is a starting point for a discussion, right? And there is value in making, you know, not getting something right because somebody else might have made the same mistake. So just telling the students every time you do the think, pair, share activity, to reiterate to the students that there's really opportunity in every answer. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Zach, go ahead.
This is, how do I lower my hand? I'll figure it out. Something that was going off of what Rebecca was talking about cold calling, because students hate being cold called. If I was a student, I would immediately turn off my Zoom if I was cold called on something. But something that I found to be really helpful or works really well in my class is I do warm calling, which is I email the student a couple days before and tell them on Wednesday morning, you'll be expected to talk for optional. They can avoid it if they want to, but I would like you to talk for 2 minutes about this thing. I'll give them a vague prompt and they can follow the prompt or they can do their own thing. It allows room for them to speak. And they almost all do it and they're almost all really excited about it. The downsides are that only one person is like, they're not all thinking about that, right? Only one of them is thinking about that thing, but at least someone's speaking, right? Someone new and I go throughout the whole class. And it also works well for me because I have like 20 to 30 students. If I had 300, it wouldn't work at all, right? Because then I'd randomly pick people and then people wouldn't be included. So that doesn't work at all. I don't think it would work as well, but I found it to be extremely helpful. And it opens up the room in the class for other people's voices to be heard and they respond to it very positively. But it has limitations.
Is warm calling your own term, or is that something you had read somewhere?
No, I got it I was listening to one of the like iTunes U podcasts, and it was like some
coin that if it's yours. That's what
I don't even know, but it was something that someone was saying in some podcast I was listening to, and they said that they expected it. They were doing it for like grad students. And I was like, it actually sounds like a pretty good idea. And for them, a warm calling was like a 30-minute, like, here's your presentation. But for me, it's like a trivial piece. Oh, cool. You're writing a piece of the warm calling. Oh, wait, I like it a lot. It's really cool.
It sounds cool. And these are all, thank you guys for all sharing sort of your sort of diversity of ways that you approach these things. So I have here, Rebecca had mentioned table 2. So let's go ahead and look at that in a little more detail. The various assumptions that people make about the benefits of sharing, and then maybe things that we're not thinking about. And one of the assumptions that especially speaks to my experience, you guys have already alluded to, and that is the idea of a classroom dynamic, minimizing the domination of a discussion by 2 or 3 confident people, and the various approaches that you guys have already suggested to potentially alleviate that sort of concentration in the hands of a few. Something I've tried with small group discussion is doing the sharing via writing on the blackboard, getting groups up there, sending someone up to write all their ideas down, which seems to have the benefit of someone has to talk, someone else has to write, but then also everybody else's ideas sort of gets out there in writing form as opposed to somebody, you having to say them yourself. So that's another sort of diversionary approach that's worked on my end. But some of these other ideas here about this will encourage people to talk more, this will give people training to talk more, which on the surface seem sound, but then this paper actually brings up some really interesting points suggesting it might not be as fruitful as we think. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I did it again, darn.
Well, no, you know what's happening? I go to lower your hand and then you can
okay, sorry. One of the things that was occurring to me as kind of at odds with the premise of the paper is that I'm pretty sure all of us in our programs do spend time talking about how we're training our students to communicate orally. And so the think, pair, share, and potentially the share portion or whatever it morphs into can actually be a really important kind of outcome that is part of that assessment. And so you know, as we're thinking about developing these speaking skills, I mean, I think we need to be thinking about the developmental trajectory, right? And like where some of these things can be mapped onto a very deliberate thing and talked about to the students again in terms of what we have in our program that's trying to help you acquire these skills so that you might use them successfully as a professional. And anyway, it's just another aspect that I think kind of maps on to the challenges and what we do, you know, how we deconstruct and reconstruct for that to be consistent with, you know, that kind of development.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, so when I think about this, I think about something my advisor used to do. So he would walk around and he would listen in, and when he heard something that was good, he said, that, you know, he would say, that's a brilliant, or he would say, that's a great way to think about this. I'm going to call on you when we go back to the whole group system, the whole group, because everybody needs to hear your perspective. So he would, you know, he would show them in real time that their opinion was valuable. And then they would be prepared, you know, they would have a few minutes to think, gather their thoughts, and then go back to the main group. So I think one of the things that they don't necessarily think about enough is how to build confidence, right? There are other methods we can use to kind of work around people's fears, but there's also something we can do to build confidence in our students. And I think that's so important to think about.
Thank you. Holly.
So speaking of that building confidence, I definitely had the assumption 6 that this is a big class problem and not a small class problem. And I had a class of 6 people and I was like, oh, we're just going to be one little group and we'll just discuss every day and everyone will talk and we won't have to worry. And that class, all of them didn't want to talk to me. They didn't want to speak up in class. And maybe it was worse because it was a small class, because I was looking at them and they were looking at me and there was no place to hide. So we still did think, pair, share, but then we just turned in cards. They just wrote, and then I read them, and there was only 6 people, so I could read them just standing there. And then I just called out good ideas and answered questions. And pretty soon by the end of the year, we were all talking like I wanted us to, because they saw that their opinions were valued and there was no fear in asking questions in the class. And we eventually were able to talk to each other, but it took half the semester of a correspondence course where they wrote everything they wanted to say to me and I read it while they were looking at me. But I totally just fell right into that assumption, but it worked out in the end.
I was also intrigued, and this is because I had not given this fair shake in my own experience, the idea of trying to decrease equity, but in fact perpetuating, as this says, new inequities in the process of doing random calling, that well-intentioned as always, right? But in trying to solve a problem, you could end up creating new problems. And so as I continue to try to learn more about issues of DEI for my own teaching experiences, and I'm sure you guys do too, I found that especially interesting in terms of assumptions to be potentially overcome here.
Michael, I think that is such a great point. And like, I think for some people, especially our colleagues who aren't in like the SOTL or DBER space, that might be really intimidating or an argument against trying to adopt new practices.
Yeah.
But for us here, I hope it's the idea that like teaching is this, you know, you can perfect it over and over and over, because it's not perfectible. Everything you do can be modified. Every context, right? Every class is different. Every new batch of students, right? So to me, it's invigorating, because it means that our craft is something that deserves continued attention always.
Yeah, it's one of those, you know, that's why they call it a practice, right? That you never get all the way to perfection. Okay, so let's go to the big meat here of the paper, which is this table 3. All the ideas that they come to for modifying the share, doing real-time synthesis, doing asynchronous synthesis, or elimination of the share outright. I'm thinking, I was going to think which category Rebecca's falls under, but then it literally was called think, pair, modify, wasn't it? So I suppose we'll call it modifying the share. That's a different approach here, but the different ways that one can get at capturing, as they say in here, the richness of the student discussion without maybe putting the social pressures on people to contribute to the conversation. Thank you for coming, Rebecca. So on here, are there particular examples that you guys have tried yourself? In the last couple sessions, we've had some interesting conversations about the asynchronous options that people have tried, either via electric posting as written here, or even collecting things in index cards like it's suggested on the paper. other approaches have been done as well, but just are there things here that you guys have tried?
I've used, oh, sorry.
Go for it, Karen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So I've used a phone a friend idea. So like if a student gets asked and you know, they're having trouble, they can phone a friend, and then that kind of layers it onto the community to kind of see how they work. I've also kind of put in my syllabus things like, I promise if you volunteer something, I will always build it up, like just like as a little guarantee to them that response in the classroom can always be a basis for an interesting conversation. So, that idea, I think we've already been talking about, there's nothing wrong. But yeah, that idea, or the idea of the past, that card idea, but just, I tell them you have license to say, it's like what that guy said, that's how I feel too. So that at least they have a go-to phrase that they can use if they don't feel good on a particular day.
How does phone a friend work?
Usually the idea is that, someone in their group, right, that they feel like was more comfortable.
I assumed it wasn't literally a phone call. I just wanted to.
No, just, just the concept of bringing a colleague in to help them with their conversation.
Cool. Okay. Holly, why don't you go ahead?
I was just wondering what you all thought about listening in. I definitely do that for lots of reasons. Like part of it is just to keep the students on task, and you wander around and make sure they're talking about what they're supposed to be talking about and not just chatting. And then sometimes it works really well. You're pulling out good ideas and you bring them up in the full class, and then individuals don't have to share out. But I also make the students uncomfortable sometimes. Yeah. They're having a wonderful conversation and I come over and they just don't look at me.
Because it's like, hey, how you doing? I'm going to sit here. Yeah, there's an awkwardness to it.
Yeah, it's like deer in the headlights and I'm disruptive by being around them. I'm just wondering like if there's a better way to kind of, you're not calling them out, but you're still getting an idea of what's going on in the class in real time.
And we actually had a conversation the other day, everything you're just describing, but like virtually, like how does one pop in and out of breakout rooms and not do it in an awkward way as well. So what ideas do people have to that question?
So in the physical space, and I actually have some data about this, if you have the ability to take on the role of the student as much as possible, that's how to get them to accept you into their social interaction. So if you walk over and you are hovering over them, you're literally standing above them, you are an authority figure who's butting in. But if you pull up a chair or squat or whatever so that you're at eye level with them, and if you have the handout or the thing that they're working on, to the extent possible, mimic what the students are doing and act like a student in the group. The other thing, like with Zoom, you can't physically whatever, but you just adopt the role and say, okay, what number are we on? And, oh, I see somebody was writing this on the Google document. Who had that idea? Like just, act like you're a team member to the extent possible. Try to mimic the social dynamic as if you were one of the students.
Salaja, do you want to go ahead? Or does someone else have an answer to this? Sorry. Okay, Salaja, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I have tried the optional consent to share, but I think there were some other good ideas, especially with the body language and to pretend to be in the student group. I think that's a very good suggestion. I'll definitely try to implement. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I know I've tried, or I took to heart some of these ones about assigning competence and an optional consent to share, which are not exactly the same, but are certainly related. The optional consent is sort of a shorter version of, I think the warm calling we talked about here earlier, of asking if they'd be willing to share their ideas, or sort of giving them a heads up that I'd like you to share your ideas. The assigning competence is something I try to do. I don't always do it well, but the idea that I want to give credit to people who come up with ideas, especially people who don't necessarily talk all that much, be it for shyness or just other people talk more, whatever it may be. So I have tried to do that as much as possible. Now, to do that, you have to have a sense of what people are talking about. And so you need to do some of the listening in. I too have struggled with, fitting in, and I take to heart those ideas that you guys have shared with, making sure you're mimicking those student behaviors or student activities to be, for lack of a better phrase, accepted to the tribe, and listening to the conversation and participating in the conversation. So of these ideas on here, which other ones are people influenced by, or maybe related to their own experiences?
I mean, some of these, it's like making a trade-off about what you want. What are your goals?
That's
so the class polling, right? Making word clouds, or the index cards where you can read through student responses, right? That takes all of the pressure off of the students. And so on the one hand, you are getting all of those voices, you are representing them. I mean, I guess with the index cards, you're not sharing out all of them, but you have them anyway. But you're taking away the kind of verbal and interactive part on the students' part. So if you're in a class where you want the students to be getting ready for a public presentation or a poster or a panel or something like that, that would influence what you pick. So I guess I would go back to the idea of backwards design, where you have to figure out what your goal is first, and then pick the things that get you there, that allow students to practice that.
This sort of the idea that not everything on here is necessarily appropriate for every setting, which I think we always need reminding when we do these discussions, and not every idea is the perfect idea for your situation. Holly.
Yeah, I like that idea of considering why you're doing it. Like, is this a practice for the professor to get feedback from the students, in which case you do want to hear all the voices and you don't necessarily want them to feed out for the group, because then you're missing some of the voices? Or is this a practice for the students, and then maybe it is important that they get some practice in public speaking? So I think there's not one way you could modify Think, Pair, Share that would fit for all instances.
What are your class objectives? What do you want to get out of it? That sort of thing. Zach, go ahead.
One of the issues, obviously, in our brave new world of COVID, is the modalities in which a student is taking the course. And like, some of my students can be in person, some of them can be online synchronous, and some of them can be asynchronous. And I'm allowing those options. I don't love asynchronous fit, but if that's what works for their lives right now, I say, we can work on that. And so for me, one of the backwards design pieces is, how do I get the asynchronous folks to even consider themselves part of the community, right? Because they might never meet me. We can arrange that, but they don't often interact with other students in class because they're not in class. And so any kind of asynchronous communication, Flipgrid or discussion boards, we've been trying to do that, just a way that they can feel that they can still communicate, because they can't do they can do warm calling, but they can't if they're not there at 9 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? Because that's when warm calling occurs. And so other forms of asynchronous communication we've had to do, but that's an effort to build a community in this really scattered time. And moving forward, I don't know what's going to happen. I kind of like the equity increase and the accessibility increase of this various modalities, but it certainly like fractures the class. And then all of a sudden, people, I don't want them to feel like they're drifting away, right? That they're disconnected from the community that we're trying to build, which has really been hard for us. And we're a very small school, and so if we don't have our community, like, we got nothing, right? That's like the thing that we're holding on to with our fingertips. And so ways to build that community in an asynchronous fashion it's been really hard.
We've been having, everywhere, sort of that repeated conversation of sort of what happens when, as you say, the brave new world is over. And what if these new modalities stick around and what go away? What have we learned? That sort of thing. And so those are interesting points you make about, are there particular things that we have done as a matter of need for the pandemic that may become, maybe not standard practice, but more routine practice in what we do? So we shall see. But as another liberal arts college instructor, yeah, the aspect of the community is critical to maintain, and finding ways to do that while sort of respecting everybody's own individual anxieties maybe is a challenge for sure. Other thoughts on these? And in fact, we should talk at the bottom there, the notion of eliminating the share outright, that in some cases, maybe you do the thinking and the pairing, and there are other opportunities to obtain the ideas you're looking to obtain from your students that's not involved with the sharing at all. God, Mike, I just got to Michael's comment. That's just too much. Think, pair, care, good God. I mean, you use as the host, my remove option for the meeting for that. But yes, think, pair, care. Like, what are we doing that is most appropriate for the individual students? And maybe, even though it's sort of think, pair, share is one of those things that's sort of been, if you've been brought up in active learning techniques, it's just, oh, it's just a thing you do. Like, it's one of those tried and true principles. And so it's interesting to see, no less than a Kimberly Tanner paper saying, oh, well, maybe you should eliminate this. And to think about those ideas that maybe it's not appropriate in your class. Maybe the dynamics are such that simply getting the students to talk about these things is the be all end all for your objectives, and you don't need to go through the sharing aspect of it. So that's an interesting perspective. I mean, I guess as we've talked about here a couple times, the idea of what your goals are will dictate this. And as Kelsey just put in chat, it should be replaced with something. And what that something is. And to me, it would lend back to the asynchronous synthesis. Like if I were to eliminate the share, I'd probably do something like ask for an electronic submission. Some of the classes for me where it's appropriate, which is usually like a bioethics type class, something like that, I'll do weekly response papers, which will be sort of a longer form version of a share, but it does give them a direct conduit to me just to talk about what's on their mind with the class or particular topics or issues that have been percolating in their brain as a result of the class. And so those writing assignments have worked well for me in that respect. So for you guys, if you're not, yeah, Carlos mentions anonymous asynchronous polls too to share. Those of you that do the polling, what are you using for that in terms of platforms? Are you suggestions for that?
So I'm super spoiled because the University of Minnesota has their own thing called Chime In, which is awesome.
Because of course, University of Minnesota has the best of everything in this respect. So,
yeah. I was using Poll Everywhere, which is free, but you can only have up to 40 responses. So it worked for my smaller enrollment, but as soon as I got to my larger classes, it wasn't a great option. Sure. I would encourage people to think about not using Kahoot. I think students like the gamification, but I think it encourages quick responses rather than thinking. And so all of those things about competition and those students who know are rewarded, where those students who feel already left out or behind are going to be penalized. So I don't like Kahoot.
That's true about the gamification part of it, from what I've seen. Carlos, how about you? What platform do you use? Oh yeah, Top Hat. Okay, and that's true. And this came up the other day too, that there's always an app for everything. And we can keep introducing different various things to technology. There is the notion of overload on different techniques people use. So I agree with that, definitely. Salaja, can I have you follow up on that, Socrative? comment?
So this, it's not very different, but it's students don't have to buy a subscription.
Oh, that is a platform. Okay.
It is a platform, yes.
Okay. I thought you were just suggesting like, oh, take a Socratic approach. Like, yes, we could. Okay, that's an actual.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Cool. Yeah, it's a platform. Sorry.
Cool. And so, what are the advantages, or why do you like it?
There is something called a space race where I put students in groups, and then I have like 10 questions that they have to go through, and people work in groups and they can see the bars moving as they solve more and more questions and get it done in a certain time. So this is to basically recap a lecture. And there is one feature that I would like to use more of. It's called the exit ticket. So at the end of the lecture, you poll to make sure that they understand. They take away all the key takeaways from the class. So that's the exit ticket feature that I would like to use more of, but those things are there on the Socrative platform. And plus it is free to the students. They don't have to buy a subscription. They can just download it on their phone. There's a teacher app that I download, and then there's a student app that's free for them. So it's
cool.
Yeah.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think in summary, this paper's a thought provoker, just taking something that we, I think, establish as just a thing that you do, not even in question, and not necessarily turn it on its head, but think about alternative ways one could approach the discussion or sharing aspects of the activity. And I think one of the big take homes in all of this is being deliberate about your learning objectives. And once you have a good solid sense of your learning objectives, being able to modify the think, pair, share in a way that best gets the students doing what it is you want them to be doing to attain those particular learning goals. Any other comments on this particular? Because if not, I'm going to go prepare for my lab too. But the chat discussion combined with our in-person discussion, this is the richest chat discussion I've had in a long time, just seeing all the comments on here too. So thank you on both mediums here for your contributions. All right, have a good day. And those of you that are in weather, stay safe out there.
Thanks, Joe.